erratic behavior. And so imagine if you tried to learn about the United States only from interviewing them, right? You would have a really skewed perspective. And I think both South Korea and the US understand that. But this is an instance where you're getting normal North Koreans who haven't defected, who have instead been captured in combat. And so learning what they have to say is going to be hugely valuable to Western intelligence agencies, but it's also hugely valuable to us. So let's take a look. So first off, he says, there were about 40 of us, but all are dead. I am alone. I have nothing left to lose. And we're going to get this translation. And then there's actually supposedly a Reddit translation by someone who claims to be a Korean speaker, which seems to be a little bit more word for word, so to speak. Now, one other thing that's worth noting is that this individual appears to have suffered from some level of a concussion, right? When you have brain damage, you're not going to be your most articulate. He also physically appears to be having a very hard time speaking. But they said he's alleging, quote, the Russian dogs, likely the Russians rushed us to attack, or it's, the enemy covered us with artillery and drones. Baba Yaga, a demon from hell. So what he's saying is that the Russians, what it seems to be alleging is that the Russians pushed the North Korean soldiers to attack, likely before they were fully ready to do so, before they felt trained or felt like they had a plan. And it says the Ukrainians, of course, fought back with artillery and drones, right? They were probably impressed with the accuracy. This is something that, again, the North Korean military has not fought since the late 50s. And so artillery has come a long way. And remember, they are still running a military that looks pretty 1950s adjacent. So imagine you're a North Korean farmer who's trained under the North Korean military, and then suddenly you see a drone for the first time, right? This is someone who's it's probably fairly rare to see an aircraft, let alone a combat drone, right? And Baba Yaga is, of course, the Russian term for a Ukrainian heavy lift drone that they've designed that can carry multiple bombs, but also is kind of become a sort of lore fixture because it can lift such heavy things. It does things that the Russians don't think are possible, like, again, dropping multiple warheads. And in some cases, there's Russians who actually think that the Baba Yaga can steal an entire person from the battlefield. Right, he talks about how his comrades were killed instantly and that he only survived because he hid under bodies, so likely trying to play dead and prevent the Ukrainians from following up with more drone strikes. And this is, again, one of the reasons I think this is fairly credible is this statement here. The Russians promised that we would build fortifications and guard objects, but they sent us on an assault in the Kursk region. This is actually a common story, something we've also heard from Nepalese troops and Cuban troops who claim that they're ostensibly recruited to perform sort of rear line construction duties, right? To perform, again, fortification construction or building maintenance. Sometimes they're told they're going to be guards at facilities in the rear. And they say, oh, well, you're being hired to do this so that we free up Russian troops to conduct these heavier duty combat operations. And the funny thing is that in the U.S. military, that's actually how we do use contractors. While some contractors perform combat operations. In general, the U.S. military preferred to have trained uniformed soldiers perform combat operations directly, and that sort of rear area type stuff, base security, that was the realm of contractors. In fact, even our small 200-person FOB was able to secure funding for a contract. We actually contracted with an Australian firm who hired highly vetted local Afghans and I think a few Nepalese former soldiers to perform guard duty at our forward operating base. And that was huge because it freed up our soldiers to effectively double our combat patrol schedule. So it's not something that you say, oh, I would know right away if I got offered that deal. Well, no, because lots of people were offered that deal and that's actually what they did. Of course, the North Koreans, again, likely not given that much of a choice. But as I've talked about in other videos, in all likelihood, the North Koreans, they are entering an existing pipeline, right? Russia has trained a lot of foreign volunteers, foreign contract soldiers who don't speak Russian, who have questionable military experience, right? Again, think like Cubans and Nepalese. who there's a pipeline for them to go through. And likely that pipeline involves some level of this kind of story where you're told something sort of preposterous. And even though for the North Koreans, Kim probably doesn't care or doesn't even want these guys to know that they're going to be involved in heavy combat. I'm surprised he can say this. One, I think it's funny that they have to talk about Kim Jong-un the sort of the way Muslims talk about Muhammad, right? They always have to add like peace be upon him and add superlatives. And so he has to be the great sun-faced Kim Jong-un. And I think it's an interesting sort of take to be like the Russian army. Putin tricked Kim Jong-un. And it's funny because, of course, implying that Putin could trick someone who has a deity level of skill and ability is pretty funny. But I guess even in myth, right? Like gods are tricked on a fairly routine basis in the universe of historic myth. I wonder if there's something similar in kind of Korean mythology, like some kind of great deceiver. Okay, this thought was interesting. This is a real meat grinder. There's no such thing even in 50 years. My grandfather talked about the war, but this war is a real hell. One of the things that kind of happens in a lot of countries is there's a wide range of wartime experiences, right? And sure, any soldier will tell you that not everyone's combat deployment is created equal, right? And there's levels to the game, so to speak. So there are the majority of soldiers, right? Almost 2/3 experience no combat, right? Like they are, for example, a good example is like JD Vance, right? Vice presidential candidate, or Tim Walz is another example, right? They're both veterans who served their country in a time of war, but did not experience direct combat, right? JD Vance did deploy to Iraq, but he, by his own admission, says, I only left the forward operating base once where I briefly met some very impoverished Iraqi kids. So he never came really proximate to anything kind of war adjacent, right? He was with a Marine Air Wing doing public affairs and press releases, which does not diminish like serving in uniform, right? Same with Tim Walz, right? Someone who served, overseas in the National Guard, right? Was activated during Enduring Freedom but he was in a backfill role, right? A unit had deployed out of Europe, and his unit was sent to that European base to kind of keep things running while that unit fought in Afghanistan. So, just because Granddad told you about his experience in a war, doesn't mean that it's illustrative of all war experiences. In fact, no one person can experience all of war, right? And again, even I'm going to sit there, like, I don't pretend to be like, oh, I was in 400 Gorgillion gunfights. Like, no, dude, the guys like the Rangers, the SEALs, Green Berets, those guys who would seek out the most dangerous and intense fights. Like, that's a different animal. Yeah, we went on a lot of combat patrols. We went on a fuck ton of combat patrols. And some of them we hit IEDs, some of them we got ambushed, but the majority, nothing at all happened. But that's my particular experience, right? And so again, you've got this grandfather who's had his experiences, but he's like, this is so much worse. He says, the Russians did not provide us with anything. They threw us into assault without intelligence, ammunition, without normal weapons. This is sort of fascinating. What does he think? I want to know how he even thinks about, like, what are normal weapons, right? What is prior intelligence? I'm fascinated by this very idea, if this is true. Anyway, guys, if you feel like you are taking on challenges without your own normal weapons, I don't know, or intelligence, maybe you need a little bit of something to boost your cognition. How about some caffeine? Why not check out Strike Gum? Strike Gum, we've got 90 milligrams caffeine in each piece. That's as much as a Red Bull, as much as an Amp Energy. We're zero sugar, made in the USA, veteran owned, obviously, and we're the highest rated energy gum on Amazon. Why? I don't know, because we taste great, no sugar crash, and have all the caffeine of an energy drink. So if you're tired of living in 2006, sipping energy drinks, right? What are you going to do? Go drive motocross and be a listen to emo. Come on, guys. Like, get in 2024. There's a better way to do things, and that better way is Strike Gum. So check it out, strikegum.com. Link is in the description, or you can just go to Amazon and just plug in Strike Gum. You can't miss us. We're the energy gum with all the 5-star ratings. Yeah, that's us. Okay, let's get back to this dude's miserable experience. I'm very curious because the North Korean military is huge and notoriously under-equipped. So the fact that he says that we didn't receive prior intelligence, which I could see. He may just be saying I was thrown into an assault without being told what I was assaulting. That would be that, like a private in most militaries does not expect a high level of intelligence, right? U.S. military privates, would absolutely get that, right? That's what we would try to do. We would brief the privates again extensively because they would have to make independent decisions without us. But again, I was in a military police unit in a Western country, so like we just had an expectation that our privates, our specialists would have a super high level of autonomy and would be able to make independent decisions because that's how they were treated at base, right? They signed for a patrol car and they were like, yo, you've got the authority to arrest a colonel if the need is necessary. So, different militaries are going to give their rank and file different levels of intelligence, but saying, hey, we didn't have ammunition, again, could be like without a full combat load. And I don't know what they mean by without normal weapons, because I've never even seen a North Korean soldier using an optic. He may mean like fire support. This is also something where, again, he says, the Ukrainians have technologies that Russians do not have. We were used as bait. This is true. I don't think he's bait. I think he means more of a reference of like, we were the first wave of this assault that was meant to absorb Ukrainian defenses, or possibly the old school Wagner tactic, where they'll have soldiers go out and deliberately draw fire in order to expose the positions of Ukrainians, right? So they get hit with drones, but in the process, Ukrainian drone teams may expose themselves, allowing Russian artillery crews to target their positions more accurately. Again, he says, Putin, your army is weak and we'll lose this war. Our brothers died because the chaos in your army, it's not war, it's a slaughter. This sounds a little brazen, almost like he's coached. I don't think a real North Korean would say this kind of things. And you hear statements like this, and you're like, okay, this is either a really generous translation, or I think more likely this is a function of the again, I think this is a generous translation or a little prompting by interrogators to produce kind of a propaganda type video. I survived by chance. They were not going to evacuate me, but I was able to get out on my own. Well, he didn't get out. He got to the Ukrainians who took him prisoner. Slight difference. This is, okay. So it sounds like he made it through one operation and then went on a second one. He says, the Russian commander told me that I betrayed my country. He's not fighting he's fighting for his country indirectly because I did not die in battle. They treat fighters like disposable wooden rice sticks. That sounds like the Russian experience. Yeah. Again, this sounds like a propaganda talking point, and I call it out when I see it. Right, the Russians use us for a job they must do themselves. They have huge losses. That's why they throw us onto assaults. This is a trap. This also aligns with kind of the data that we've seen with large Russian losses that they need to offset somehow. And again, this isn't an accident or a deliberate. He thinks he's talking as though this was an experience that North Koreans are uniquely having, that Russian soldiers are fighting under better conditions. They're not. So I saw mountains of corpses. The Russians do not take them from the battlefield, burning machinery and human flesh everywhere. Yes, it has to be pretty horrific. I mean, from what we've seen, it is a pretty horrific battlefield. The Russians will not win this war. This is a military defeat. Okay, so what I want to point out is there's actually down here a translation. He says, my translation is limited. Although I speak Korean, there are some differences in dialect between North and South. I may have misunderstood or heard something. So you can see here that the speaker is speaking quietly and mumbling, so it's hard to understand most of what he's making out. But this is this is all I could get. Take it with an amount of salt, right? A lot of unintelligible statements that he tries to translate phonetically. He's translating. We upper ranking officer, a place called Kursk, right? It could have been we made it to a base in a place called Kursk. However, when we got to Kursk, we were suddenly ordered to join the fight. After that, the Russian jerks did not provide us with reconnaissance, or weapons. So that could be weapons support. He says, when our group attacked Ukrainian troops, something unintelligible. Unintelligible. He says, something my friends, something head got cut off, something able to survive. So this actually could be an accurate translation of his experience. Right? More translation and David's. He said basically something, our comrades, unintelligible. Kursk is a black hole of this world. Ukrainian attack is incomprehensible, right? His personal take is that the translation of the vid is likely wrong, that he may have been reading off from something. His syllable and the way he spoke felt very unnatural, as though this could be explained by his serious injury, but it felt off. Take it with a heavy grain of salt. Not an expert of this. This is just what it sounds to me. So, again, I think this is pretty interesting, right? And again, they say, I don't trust this translation. So it sounds like this is possibly something that involves either some level of coached lines, some level of maybe reading from a script, or maybe a combination, right, of the experiences, the real experiences, combined with these other statements. So again, I would take it with a grain of salt too, but I think there is enough truth to say that the North Koreans may be surprised at just how expendable they really are. Again, they're coming from a regime that is notorious for being closeted and hiding the reality from their people, and are going to another regime that has its own totally different system of sort of smoke and mirrors. And at the end of the day, the only thing that you can really perceive is likely the reality of combat. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to folks like Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Daniel M., Ida Skycall, all our Lieutenant tier members over on combatvetnews.com, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.